The Yearling by Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings, Chapter 2. Penny Baxter lay awake beside the vast, sleeping bulk of his wife. He was always wakeful on the full moon. He had often wondered whether, with the light so bright, men were not meant to go into their fields and labor. He would like to slip from his bed and perhaps cut down an oak for wood, or finish the hoeing that Jody had left undone. I reckon I'd ought to have crawled him about it, he thought. In his day he would have been thoroughly thrashed for slipping away and idling. His father would have sent him back to the spring without a supper to tear out the flutter mill. But that's it, he thought. The boy ain't a boy too long. As he looked back over the years, he himself had had no boyhood. His own father had been a preacher, stern as the Old Testament God. The living had come, however, not from the Word, but from the small farm near Volusia, on which he had raised a large family. He had taught them to read and write and to know the Scriptures. But all of them, from the time they could toddle behind him down the corn rows, carrying the sack of seed, had toiled until their small bones ached and their growing fingers cramped. Rations had been short and hookworm abundant. Penny had grown to maturity no bigger than a boy. His feet were small, his shoulders narrow, his ribs and hips jointed together in a continuous fragile framework. He had stood among the foresters one day, like an ash sapling among giant oaks. Lem Forrester looked down at him and said, "Why, you little old penny piece, you. You're good money, all right, but it just don't come no smaller. Little old Penny Baxter." The name had been his only one ever since. When he voted, he signed himself Ezra Ezekiel Baxter, but when he paid his taxes, he was put down as Penny Baxter, and made no protest. But he was a sound amalgam, sound as copper itself, with something, too, of the copper softness. He leaned backward in his honesty, so that he was often a temptation to storekeepers and mill owners and horse traders. Storekeeper Boyles at Volusia, as honest as he, had once given him $1 too much in change, his horse being lame. Penny had walked a long miles back again to return it. "The next time you came to trade would have done," Boyles said. "I know," Penny answered him. "Excuse me, but 'twa'n't mine, and I wouldn't have wanted to die with it on me. Dead or alive, I only want what's mine." The remark might have explained to those who puzzled at him his migration to the adjacent scrub. Folk who lived along the deep and placid river, alive with craft, with dugouts and scows, lumber rafts and freight and passenger vessels, side-wheel steamers that almost filled the stream in places from bank to bank, had said that Penny Baxter was either a brave man or a crazy one to leave the common way of life and take his bride into the very heart of the wild Florida scrub, populous with bears and wolves and panthers. It had been understandable for the Forresters to go there, for the growing family of burly, quarrelsome males needed all the room in the county and freedom from any hindrance. But who would hinder Penny Baxter? It was not a hindrance, but in the towns and villages, in farming sections where neighbors were not too far apart, men's minds and actions, property overlapped. There were intrusions on the individual spirit. There were friendliness and mutual help in time of trouble, true, but there were bickerings and watchfulness, one man suspicious of another. He had grown from under the sternness of his father into a world less direct, less honest, and in its harshness, and therefore more disturbing. He had perhaps been bruised too often. The peace of the vast, aloof scrub had drawn him with the beneficence of its silence. Something in him was raw and tender. The touch of men was hurtful upon it, but the touch of the pines was healing. Making a living came harder there. Distances were troubling in the buying of supplies and the marketing of crops, but the clearing was peculiarly his own. The wild animals seemed less predatory to him than people he had known. The forays of a bear and wolf and wildcat and panther on stock were understandable, which was more than he could say of human cruelties. In his 30s, he had married a buxom girl already twice his size, loaded her in an ox cart along with the rudiments of housekeeping, and jogged with her to the clearing, where with his own hands he had reared a cabin. He had chosen his land as well as a man might choose in the brooding expanse of scrawny sand pines. He had bought of the foresters, who lived a safe 4 miles away, high good land in the center of a pine island. The island was called by such a name in an arid forest because it was literally an island of long-leaf pines, lifted high, a landmark in the rolling sea that was the scrub. There were other such islands scattered to the north and west. Some were accident of soil or moisture-produced patches of luxuriant growth, even of hammock of the richest growth of all. Live oaks were here and there, the red bay and the magnolia, wild cherry and sweet gum, hickory and holly. A scarcity of water was the only drawback to the location. The water level lay so deep that wells were priceless. Water for inhabitants of Baxter's Island must come until bricks and mortar were cheaper, from the great sinkhole on the western boundary of the 100-acre tract. The sinkhole was a phenomenon common to the Florida limestone regions. Underground rivers ran through such sections. The bubbling springs that turned at once into creeks and runs were outbreaks of these. Sometimes a thin shell of surface soil caved in, and a great cavern was revealed, with or without a flow of water. The sinkhole included with Penny Baxter's land contained, unfortunately, no flowing spring, but a pure filtered water seeped day and night through the high banks and formed a pool at the bottom. The foresters had tried to sell Penny poor land in the scrub itself, but with cash to back him, he had insisted on the island. He had said to them, "The scrub's a fitting place for the game to raise and all the wild things, foxes and deer and panther cats and rattlesnakes. I can't raise young'uns in a pure thicket." The foresters had slapped their thighs and roared with laughter from their beards. Lim had bellowed, "How many halfpennies is there in a penny? You'll do good, you be daddy of a fox cub." Penny could hear him now after all the years. He turned over in his bed cautiously, not to awaken his wife. He had indeed planned boldly for sons and daughters, moving in prolific plenty among the longleaf pines. The family had come. Ora Baxter was plainly built for childbearing, but it had seemed as though his seed were as puny as himself. Or Lim put a mouth on me, he thought. The babies were frail, and almost as fast as they came, they sickened and died. Penny had buried them one by one in a cleared place among the blackjack oaks, where the poor loose soil made the digging easier. The plot grew in size until he was compelled to fence it in against the vandalism of hogs and polecats. He had carved little wooden tombstones for all. He could picture them now, standing white and straight in the moonlight. Some of them had names: Ezra Jr., Little Ora, William T. The others bore only such legends as Baby Baxter, aged 3 months 6 days. On one, Penny had scratched laboriously with his pocket knife. She never saw the light of day. His mind moved back down the years, touching them as a man touches fence posts in his passing. There had been a hiatus in the births. Then, when the loneliness of the place had begun to frighten him a little, and his wife was almost past the age of bearing, Jody Baxter was born and thrived. When the baby was a toddling 2-year-old, Penny had gone to war. He had taken his wife and child to the river to live with his crony, Grandma Hutto, for the few months he expected to be away. He had come back at the end of 4 years with the mark of age on him. He had gathered up his wife and boy and taken them back to the scrub with gratitude for its peace and isolation. Jody's mother had accepted her youngest with something of detachment, as though she had given all she had of love and care and interest to those others. But Penny's bowels yearned over his son. He gave him something more than his paternity. He found that the child stood wide-eyed and breathless before the miracle of bird and creature, of flower and tree, of wind and rain and sun and moon, as he had always stood. And if, on a soft day in April, the boy had prowled away on his boy's business, he could understand the thing that had drawn him. He understood, too, its briefness. His wife's bulk stirred and she made a sound in her sleep. He would act on any such occasion, he knew, as a bulwark for the boy against his mother's sharpness. The whippoorwill flew farther into the forest and took up his lament again, sweet with distance. The moonlight moved beyond the focus of the bedroom window. Leave him kick up his heels, he thought, and run away. Leave him build his flutter mills. The day'll come he'll not even care to. And that's the end of chapter 2. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and grant you his peace.